Locked On Kentucky, your daily podcast on the Kentucky Wildcats. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, what is going on, Big Blue Nation? Welcome on in to Locked On Kentucky, your daily Kentucky Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Lance Dawe, writer for Sports Illustrated for various SEC-related things. But on this podcast, we take a dive into all things Kentucky athletics. Today's episode is brought to you by HelloFresh. Skip trips to the grocery store and count on HelloFresh to make home cooking easy, fun, and affordable. That's why it's America's #1 meal kit. You can go to HelloFresh.com/college60 and use code college60 for 60% off plus free shipping. On today's episode of Locked On Kentucky, we are going to be discussing the hot topic, Ugonna Onyenso. Is he coming back to Kentucky? And if so, what would that mean for the Wildcats? So if you have not heard, Ugonna Onyenso entered the transfer portal just a couple of weeks ago. Much to the dismay of the majority, I think, of the Kentucky fan base. According to reports, it caught the Wildcats program off guard, caught the staff off guard. It was a very surprising move. Now here, as we've kind of waited further in the what is Kentucky going to do next season with the center position conversation, Hunter Dickinson being a legitimate prospect, Oscar Tshiebwe announcing that he will enter the NBA draft but maintaining his eligibility. We now, I think, are starting to get some answers about as to what could likely end up be happening with Ugonna Onyenso reportedly now, considering coming back to Kentucky. If you've not seen it online, if you've not read the articles, if you've not been on Twitter, several sources have reported this. I believe On3 reported it. Jack Pilgrim, if I'm not mistaken, was one of the people that was first on this. Kyle Tucker of The Athletic has also been having conversations about this. I'm not sure if Matt Jones was anyone to report this other than just a commentator, but it seems like the big media heads in the Kentucky sphere are starting to now say, listen, this is a legitimate possibility, and they've started to produce articles explaining their thoughts on that. So before we dive into these articles, I want to point out to you something. I had conversations with some people that I know, some writers, some different people in the media sphere with the Wildcats, kind of trying to figure out, okay, what is the real deal? What's happening here? And everyone has essentially said what guys like Jack Pilgrim and what 24/7 Sports have written, which is Ugonna Onyenso was not the person that entered himself into the transfer portal. He did not make that decision on his own. He had people surrounding him make that choice. And that's not me speculating. That is just about now confirmed by several sources who have written about this, explaining why there's such a back and forth, dramatic, just kind of a weird situation here where we're going back and forth and back and forth. According to what Jack Pilgrim, what 24/7 wrote, it looks like the goal for Ugonna Onyenso was not necessarily playing time for next season. That could be a factor. But on top of this, it was money. It was the expectation that there was better money to be had at other schools, so entering Onyenso in the portal to let him go, have more transfer time, or portal time, excuse me, those were both wrong, to have more time, period, playing time, that is, and to potentially go get a little bit more money out of that was possible. Apparently, they took a look around. Apparently, they looked at different programs. I believe there was UConn and St. John's as two destinations that were just kind of thrown out there as maybe places Onyenso could land. And they've come to the realization, hey, there's not a lot of places in college basketball where a kid that's sitting on the bench that averaged 2.5 points per game can make six figures. And I'm not saying that they're stupid. I'm just saying that there's a learning curve, obviously, with all this transfer portal stuff and with this new NIL thing that's been going on. Onyenso, very, very much so new to this. His handlers, his uncle, whoever's making the decisions for him, very much so new to this. I'm not knocking them for that. It's just now we start to get to see the reality of, oh, the situation that Onyenso was placed in to begin with was actually a pretty solid one. And when you look at the way that his career could project out and how much he could be needed on next year's roster, hey, maybe there's a legitimate chance that Onyenso actually does decide to return. So a couple of things here that I want to note from some of these articles. Daryl Bird of 24/7 Sports over at the Cat's Paws pointed out his uncle, who is his legal guardian, is attempting to do what he thinks is best for his nephew. It was the uncle who completed the information and formally entered Onyenso into the transfer portal. It's the people around him, again, one more time, that are making these choices for him. Now, whether or not he actually does end up coming to Kentucky, back to Kentucky, is currently up in the air. But we go back to, let's look at Jack Pilgrim and what he wrote, talking about how Onyenso could pull his name out of the transfer portal and return to Lexington for a sophomore campaign. Quote, "It's very much on the table. Multiple sources tell KSR." Jack Pilgrim goes on to say something that I think is interesting that I've highlighted here. Onyenso earned 6 figures this past season through NIL, sources tell Kentucky Sports Radio, despite being on an F1 student visa and averaging just 2.5 points and 2.6 rebounds per contest. Kentucky is uninterested in jumping into a bidding war for any player on its current roster in the transfer portal or a high school recruit. Onyenso's situation is no different. Kentucky's NIL pitch speaks for itself, as do the ongoing results of players making more in Lexington than anywhere else in college basketball, despite may have been relayed through back channels to those looking to make decisions on the freshman center's behalf. They're not trying to pull Onyenso out because they don't like Kentucky. They're not trying to pull him out because they think that he's in a bad spot. They're trying to get Onyenso in the best situation possible, which is more playing time, more money, more of the spotlight. The kid deserves it. He's defensively a very solid talent. I think that Kentucky would benefit strongly from keeping him around for a majority of reasons. Does he return to Kentucky? I think it's likely. I think that we're looking at a very good chance of him returning now that the situation has been reassessed, and I think the people in charge and Onyenso himself have likely realized, hey, look, they're giving us about as good of a deal as we can possibly get. Let's go ahead and make this return happen. Again, I want to reiterate, this is not just reading articles for you guys. This is having conversations with a couple different people that I've started to make connections with through the Kentucky media sphere, just to make sure I'm not just reading things off to you guys that you could read yourself. I want to make sure that there's nothing else here lying in the bushes that we may not be aware of. So, will Onyenso return? I want to leave that for you guys in the YouTube comments below. Go ahead and comment down below. Do you think he'll come back? Do you think he will leave? Do you think he should leave? And I think the bigger question that we all need to be addressing here is, okay, if he does return, what does the situation look like for Kentucky? What does the roster makeup look like? I want to get to that in just a second. Before I do that, though, I want to tell you guys about our friends over at FanDuel. Grand slams, no-hitters, and double plays are back. The MLB baseball season is here, and there's no better place to get in on the action than at FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Right now, new customers can step up to the plate with a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. All you have to do is go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. You can place your first bet and get up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if you don't win. Aaron Judge, you could potentially put a prop on him. He could potentially pick up where he left off last season with a bunch of home runs. You could go over or under on a pitcher for strikeouts. It's a very common one. That's actually one that I like to do with friends, actually. You can build an SGP with your favorite matchup of the day. All these different things that you can do over at FanDuel. It's a lot of fun. The different things you can do with baseball analytics and then betting itself, it's all very entertaining, very fascinating to me. I would encourage you guys to not miss your chance to get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. That's FanDuel, the official partner of Major League Baseball. All right, continuing along here on the Monday edition of Locked On Kentucky, Lance Dawe hanging out here with you. So we've talked about the thought process through Ugonna Onyenso maybe returning for Kentucky, maybe taking a step back, maybe realizing, hey, this is about as good as it gets in college basketball right now. Let's go back to the place that already knew a little bit about us, that can develop us a little bit more, that can maybe help us take the next step, both financially and career-wise when it comes to what he can do heading to the NBA. The decision has not been made. If he does end up coming back, I think it's great. If he leaves and is officially gone, I'm going to be a little confused because I will be very intrigued to see what the transfer portal destination looks like for him. Because the school, at this point, it is assumed going to be paying him at least six figures. So what his role looks like on that team is going to be fun to watch. Anyway, point being, he could return. He could come back. So one of you guys actually asked the question for me on YouTube, went over to my comments, and John, I believe it's Maldiner, is how you pronounce his last name. John Maldiner asks, I'd like your opinion on how things change if Ugonna comes back, as it is now suggested that he might. Do we still need a big? How would we handle it if both Ugonna and Oscar came back? Would Aaron Bradshaw really play the 4? Oscar's role. Really appreciate John Maldiner asking this question. I'm glad that it validates that today's topic is interesting to at least one person out there. I want to address the second to last question first. So recently on the show, I've been talking about how Kentucky could positionally rotate through the 3 or 4 players, if they add one through the portal, that they could have in their front court, assuming Damian Collins is gone, which I don't think is crazy at this point. Aaron Bradshaw, based on what John Calipari said about the rotation just a few weeks ago before the McDonald's All-American game, yes, I think that Bradshaw would play the 4 if Kentucky had the players around him to allow that to happen. So what I'm saying here is, I think at least one of two things needs to happen. Tshiebwe comes back, or Kentucky gets a player, starter or not, through the transfer portal that can definitively play the 5. So you could see Onyenso as that player potentially. We'll get into that in a second. But to answer your question, would Bradshaw really play the 4? I think based on what we've seen out of his high school tape and looking at him in the McDonald's All-American game, the kid can stretch the floor. The kid can shoot. He can handle the ball well. He is offensively a lot more complete than even I assumed. And so I think that, yes, he could comfortably play power forward for Kentucky. That's why Cal said, hey, we may end up playing 2 7-footers. So here's the different situations. If Bradshaw and Onyenso are your front court, do you play Onyenso at the 5 and let Bradshaw play at the 4? I think that makes sense, but at the same time, it doesn't complete the puzzle. You need to have a player that you add through the transfer portal. So, and I'm answering John's other question, do we still need to add a big if Ugonna comes back? I think yes. I think yes. So if Ugonna comes back and Oscar Tshiebwe leaves, I think that you need to add somebody. Is it Hunter Dickinson? I don't know. At that point, I think that maybe letting Ugonna have maybe he's expecting a little bit more playing time. I don't know. I'm just speculating here. Maybe it's playing time that he wants. And so maybe a guy like Hunter Dickinson would not be okay taking the cut there to kind of just be on a really good team. Maybe you go get another defensive-minded prospect. You can have 2 really strong centers. Regardless, I think Kentucky needs, whether it's a starter or it is a bench player behind Ugonna, they need to co-add depth there. I'm sorry, whatever you want to say about Lance Ware, he's an energetic, positive, fun-to-watch kid. He is not going to be the answer for Kentucky in the front court next season. He's not going to be. I think that Ugonna right now would benefit from having another player behind him that could step in and contribute starter caliber minutes. If Kentucky's got the scholarships to do it, they should do it. There's another world there, and John also asks about this. There's another world here where Kentucky may have Ugonna and Oscar both come back. I think that this is pretty straightforward. You have Oscar Tshiebwe at your 5, Onyenso at your backup 5. You have Aaron Bradshaw at your 4, and you bring in somebody to be your backup power forward. You bring in a transfer power forward then. That's where I think a player like Jamison Battle could come into play, unless he's already committed somewhere, in which I'm just completely off there. But yeah, I think that you just end up having a really, really strong front court, and you bring in somebody to help Bradshaw out. Because very calmly, I'll say this, the answer is no. If you want to do a rotation where you take Bradshaw out and you want to leave Tshiebwe or Onyenso in, the answer is not then to put Tshiebwe or Onyenso at the 4, or Lance Ware for that matter. That's not the way that this should work, at least in my mind. So you've got Bradshaw, a transfer portal backup power forward, Oscar Tshiebwe and Ugonna at your power forward and your center spot. So I think that it's all pretty straightforward here how Kentucky could rotate in things if both of them decide to come back, if neither of them do. The possibility that I didn't explore here is, let's say Bradshaw and Tshiebwe are your two cornerstone pieces here. I still think you put Bradshaw at the 4, you let Tshiebwe play the 5, and you still go get a backup center. Again, I love Lance Ware, but I just think that Kentucky would benefit so much from getting either a Twin Towers type look, where you have somebody that's on the same caliber as Tshiebwe in terms of minutes are concerned, or maybe you just try and find somebody that'll be comfortable being in the shadows for one final season. Who knows? Maybe you go get somebody that's younger. I don't think Kel'el Ware would want to transfer into a situation like that, where he's behind somebody like Tshiebwe for a year, or even splitting time. But I think getting a player like him that's younger and letting him develop behind Oscar, and then being the front court piece that you kind of depend on as an anchor next year, that you surround players with, I think that would be great. Hunter Dickinson is a prospect that I still want. Hunter Dickinson is a prospect that I still think Kentucky can get. But with Oscar Tshiebwe and Hugo hanging in the balance, it's more than likely that other programs with more solid and more sure situations with their front court, like either they do or they don't have pieces coming back, I think those teams will be able to take advantage of this time that Kentucky is making decisions. So I'll say something that I've said for several episodes now, talking about what Kentucky needs to do with different players in the portal and with players that they currently have on roster. I'm not saying we need to do this right now. I'm not saying that you need to go ahead and do this today, but they need to speed this process up. We need to be having these conversations, and we need to be making moves, because there are really, really good players in the portal right now that Kentucky could be missing out on if they don't execute. I still think Kentucky throughout this process, though, needs to be active looking for another center in the transfer portal, regardless of whatever moves are made, even if it's just one decision, even if it's just Hugo comes back. Okay, we assume Tshiebwe's going to be gone. I still want a backup center or somebody that can start over him. Honestly, I'd be happy if it was somebody that could split time with him. I think that would be the best world there, the best situation. You get one other player that's uber talented that can start with him, or one player that's just uber experienced that could rotate with him fairly evenly. But regardless, hopefully, John, I answered your questions. Yes, we still need a big. Yes, Bradshaw would play the 4. Oscar, I think, would be your starting center if he came back, regardless of whatever happened. I'm not sliding him up or sliding him behind somebody. And I think that's how I would handle it. So if you've got any thoughts on how you think Kentucky's center/power forward situation is going to work out, if you think Onyenso is going to come back, if you think Tshiebwe is going to come back, if you think Kentucky would be better off just saying no to both of them and going to get other pieces in the transfer portal, you can leave all of that in the YouTube comments below. And that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Kentucky. Hey, you can follow the show on Twitter at LockedOnUK. You can follow me on Twitter at LanceDawe_. You can follow the show over on Instagram. That is at Kentucky Podcast. Any questions, comments, concerns, you can leave them all in the YouTube comments below, or you can hit me on the socials. I will see you all tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Kentucky. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and God bless.